welcome to the show, Jenny.
Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Thanks for taking the time to sit down with me. So the first thing I got to ask is that is your before and after.
Yeah, that's me.
That
Both of
that went
them.
that went viral, right?
Yeah. hmm
I thought so because I've seen it a few times,
It's
and
been all over the world. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Like, so what was going on with you that day? The picture that left. What was happening that day?
I was arrested.
I mean, what were you? What did you get arrested for?
Oh, I don't know. I've been arrested a lot of times, so I don't know what the charges were that day. Probably drug possession or something. I'm sure I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing. So it's kind of, that's kind of what happens when I do drugs. So I commit crimes.
Well, let's rewind then. How did you grow up? Like middle class, upper, like,
No, my mom was on welfare. My dad went to prison when I was 4. I was introduced to drugs by the age of 7. Yeah.
what were you introduced to at 7?
Marijuana and then alcohol shortly thereafter. By the time I was 12, I was doing methamphetamine. And I've done so many different shows. Most of this information is really public knowledge. And so, but by the time I was 14 years old, I was a crack smoker. So yeah, just a progression. I grew up in a meth family. So
Okay, and you're not
yeah.
the first person to tell me meth that early. The earliest I've heard of meth being introduced was 5.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's pretty early.
But the people that were giving it to him were also abusive towards him. So
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty common. Any kid that is introduced to drugs at an early age, I would probably imagine that there's probably some abuse going on. So yeah, my household was very abusive. There were 7 kids in my family. My mom was ill-equipped to take care of kids. And over my lifetime, she was married 5 different times, which doesn't even include, the amount of boyfriends. But, I want to say, based on, I'm 51 years old. So based on my own experience with drugs and all the things that I swore that I would never do, I think as parents, our intentions typically start out good. But as with any person that ends up under the influence of drugs and in an intimate relationship with drugs, drugs take precedence over everything, including your children, your well-being, your family members. Any sense of anything that is moral or virtuous. And so,
and
I
that's the
think that.
truth. You said intimate. That's the truth. I mean,
Oh yeah, no,
you
that's
gotta
an intimate relationship with heroin and cocaine right there.
yeah,
So,
and the intimacy lies almost in the method as much as it is the substance. Like
well,
for me, I was addicted to
I
cigarette.
say intimate because um, drugs are first and foremost. You every waking moment is spent, fantasizing, using, participating in a relationship with. I mean, I think, and anybody that's been under the influence, I think, can identify with the fact that every fiber of our being is driven to be with that substance, right? And so we are committed to it, we're loyal to it. We will do away with anything in our wake if that is the requirement, right? To have that thing with us in every moment of our waking life. And that's just what it really became for me, right? And I think that, and I give my mom grace. Granted, it would be really really easy to blame her for everything, and I promise you that I did for a really long time. Well into my 40s, it was all my mom's fault, but I had to recognize, that, well, she wasn't the one making the decisions, after a period of time that destroyed my life. That was me. And so, and then I've been dealing with the aftermath of my choices and how they've impacted my children, because I too had children who I did not raise aside from my youngest, and they now have, residual effects of my choices. And so, so I really kind of try to defend parents that are labeled as these, terrible monstrosities, because, you know, I really believe that we're all building the plane as we fly it, right? I don't think that there's a guidebook. I think some people, based on our perspective, parent or live life a little bit better than some of the rest of us. However, um, we're all trying to figure it out as we go, right? Some of our foundations looked a little bit different. So, we're able to present certain, skills, abilities, and behaviors, to our children. However, I would also argue, and this is where sort of my idea with that comes from, is that, I'm married to a guy who was raised well. Both of his parents were together, and he turned into a drug addict and went to prison a bunch of times. And so, I don't. I don't always know that, we can blame, external forces. And then there's this other caveat also, which is, was I not supposed to have this life? Because the work that I'm doing today has been built on the foundation of everything that I experienced. And so, so I'm doing a whole bunch of things because of my personal lived experience that's having a positive impact on the population that you and I are both very familiar with. So,
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this show for 2.5 years,
yeah.
and we're weekly. I have episodes that come out, and so like I've heard so many different stories, but they're so relatable to everybody else.
Mhm.
Everyone, everyone who went to rehab wrote a breakup letter to their drug. I think. I mean, that was like one of the things that I've heard so many times was people had to write breakup notes
Mhm.
to their drug of choice. So how long, what were you, how old were you on the left?
On the left, let me see, that was 2005. I think I was 33.
Okay. So how long, what were you graduating from in the right?
The University of Washington, a bachelor's degree. Yeah, political science and law, society, and justice from the University of Washington.
That's
I made
awesome.
the decision to go to college because I had been working in social services for over 5 years. I want to say, gosh, I had been working in reentry and social services for at least 7 years at that point. And what I was providing wasn't actually helping people. And some of those people were people I knew from the streets. But it wasn't helping people just like me, even if I didn't know them before they landed at my desk. And I was in multiple different roles during that period of time. I worked as a reentry housing person. I worked as a behavioral health person, a peer counselor. I worked in a housing first building as a women's advocate and floor staff. And then I worked as a case management program supervisor and supervised 3 different programs. And in each of those positions, well, the reentry position, I was able to actually help in an intentional way a bit more than I was in the social service structure. And this was in Seattle, Washington, mind you, where we have a tremendous population of, homeless, addicted, former prisoners. But I felt very morally challenged in those roles because I wasn't actually helping anyone. And I didn't really have autonomy to help people. I had to follow the construct of what the organization was trying to accomplish. And now I don't think that the organization by any means is ill-intended. But what I have recognized is that people who had come from the very place that I had come from uh, were not in positions of authority and providing a service structure based on what helped them to overcome, if that makes sense. And that's where the problem started really for me. And I felt very conflicted morally. I maintained my position for a period of time because I believed there were things that I needed to learn. And I think that's a very accurate statement because the things that I did learn in those positions is I learned how the system functions. I learned all about funding. I learned about contracts and grants. I learned um, who dictates what happens, how effective those things are, and then how that rolls down into the people that are on the firing lines. And the people that I believe are on the firing lines, a lot of them have lived experience and they're taking direction from others that don't have that same lived experience. And so what was happening is that people like me were remaining in these places that kept them dependent on these services. And the services in particular were funded based on program capacity. So So if I wasn't filling all the beds, if I didn't have so many people in at my desk every day, if I didn't have that consistent problematic human being coming in and needing my services, then my program would not be funded. And I felt even more morally conflicted as a result of that. And so I was the victim of a crime in 2016. I was clean 3.5, almost 4 years. And I realized I was violently beaten in my home. And I knew that the guy that did that was going to go into prison and come out the same guy without intervention, because I also understood the shortcomings of the carceral system. So I'm well known for being an advocate for incarceration, and I am still. I think that incarceration creates separation. It allows those of us in the midst of addiction, and I don't know about you. I'm guessing you're a recovering addict, but I personally have never successfully used drugs without committing crimes to pay for those drugs, because after a period of time, for me, it's not very long. Get this criminal thinking thing that just, comes in the moment that I
Yeah.
take one.
I did a lot of scams, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like payday loans and shit like that.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I was doing. And I was making
Yeah.
sometimes $3,000 in a day.
Right. And the money would probably be gone by the end of the day too,
And
right?
it's gone. It was gone the end of the week. Within
Yeah.
5 days,
Yeah.
that money's gone.
And
Cause
and the more we do, the more we need,
yep,
right?
because if I got four, in my head, my addiction was roxycodone, yeah,
Okay.
Roxy 30s. And in my head, I would be like, all right, I can get four for 100, and I can do three tonight, and I'll save that one for tomorrow. This way, I'm not going to be in like withdrawing
You're not
tomorrow.
gonna get sick,
And
right?
then I take the three, and now I'm like laying in bed, and I'm like, I could get higher before I fall asleep. That'll be tomorrow JD's problem. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do this last one right now, and it not do shit because it was only one, and my tolerance was so high.
Right.
The three barely got me there. So
Right.
you know,
Yeah,
and
and at some point you're not even getting high anymore. You're just getting well, and you want to be high, right?
getting well.
And enough is never enough.
Yep, I remember there's one night specifically. I was driving an hour, and the end of my addiction looked like driving an hour and a half to buy pills and then an hour and a half back again.
Yeah.
And I would have to go through Philly traffic to get through to New Jersey where I had a dealer because I lived in Lancaster County in like Amish country in PA.
Yeah.
And there was a few, I made good money though for what I was
Mhm.
doing. So I could afford the pills and never have to go to heroin just because I was addicted to snorting these pills.
Yeah.
I paid somebody one night $100 to pick up my stuff and bring it to me.
Yeah.
And him and his buddy were driving out here together. They took the ride together. And in my head, I'm like, all right, I'm getting 20 of them. I got to make these last. I'm only going to do four tonight. And I had this thing where I could do giant lines. And they get there, and he's like, show him how you can do six at one time. And I'm like, okay. And then just like that, I have six going for my 20. And it was just because I was like put on the spot to show what I can do. And I didn't think
Hmm.
twice about it. I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. Why didn't you mention that sooner? It's one of those things. And it didn't matter how much it was. Like you said, enough is never enough.
Yeah.
And so you said you're about 3.5 years clean?
Right now I'm 11 years clean.
11 years clean.
So
Okay.
yeah, when I was my clean date is December 6th of 2012. I was arrested, and that's usually how my using is stopped. Is the police usually get involved because I commit crimes, because enough is never enough. And I typically will feel so terrible about abandoning every person that matters to me, that it takes a whole lot of drugs to blot out that reality, right? And so yeah, right now I'm 11 years clean. But back when I was attacked in my home, I was 3.5 years clean. That was in 2016. And that is when I made the decision to go to University of Washington. Well, let me back up a little bit. I went to a community college. I was working in social services. I was single parenting my now 17-and-a-half-year-old daughter. And my two other kids are older and out of the home at that point. But I also was on campus because my kid was being bullied. So had a lot going on. I had a husband that was incarcerated. I had a son that was incarcerated. And so I was kind of all over the place trying to manage my life on a very small salary, working as a social service person, trying to make a difference.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't agree with what I was doing for the agency, I tried to bring my ability to make a difference in the lives of people like me into each individual meeting that I
The
that I
funding's
met.
never enough either. The funding is never enough. Like
Well, that's right. It's
I
never, and
started, my wife and I started a recovery center where we lived,
yeah,
where we held mental health meetings, we held LGBTQ meetings,
yeah.
um, we held a separate hour for LGBTQ teens to
Oh
come
yeah.
and meet each other and kind of, talk about the issues. There'd be like 6 adults there that, they could talk to, like myself or my wife, to about obstacles in the community and how to approach things and all that kind of stuff. But we had to shut down because we were getting no funding.
Right.
You know, we
Right.
we were paying for it out of our own pockets, and
Yeah.
it was COVID so
Oh
like
yeah.
it was 2021, so everyone had their vaccines by now, and the masks only were required at the end because it started coming around again during the winter. But we
Hmm.
lasted about 7 months on our own money,
Yeah.
and we had to finally let that go when I went back to my work. My wife was diagnosed with MS around the same time,
Oh, that's hard.
and it's progressive, so it just there's only ever today is the best day because tomorrow's going to be worse kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was too much for her to contribute to the meeting center on top of us paying out of pocket. We were finally had to, be like, all right, we got to give that up because you can't win all your battles. I was trying like hell to get funding. My name is JD, but the podcast is called MJ's Progress Not Perfection because that was the name of our meeting center.
Oh,
So
nice.
I named my podcast out of the meeting center because I was trying to get funding through my podcast.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was trying
So
to reach as many.
you're a member of a 12-step program then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I had both meetings there though. I held both meetings because I got sober in LA. This podcast is also sponsored by BetterHelp. If you are looking for therapy and not able to get something right away locally, you can do that with them. Within 48 hours, you can find a therapist to get on telehealth with you. I mean, I haven't heard anything but great things from people that have already done it that watch my show or listen to my show. If you're looking to get 10% off your first month, you can go to betterhelp.com/MJ's PNPMCA. That is betterhelp.com/MJ's PNPMCA.
Yeah.
And
How long were you in addiction?
10 years. Well,
And then
20 for
how did
alcohol.
you get clean?
I was watching a documentary on Netflix on 420, and it
Okay.
was called The Legend of 420. And I'm like, oh, like that's something I would do.
Yeah.
Like go to a rehab that uses cannabis. And it was featured in the documentary. It was called High Sobriety. So the next day, it was like a seed that was planted that night. The next day, I did my drive hour and a half, and then I'm sitting in the McDonald's parking lot for 6 hours, messaging everybody trying to find the pills. I finally found somebody who knew somebody, so he was like, "You got to give me one because I'm helping you out," and I'm withdrawing really bad, and I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine. You can have one." So now I only get three. It's all I could afford for myself. I do two right away just to feel better, and I'm driving back to my house an hour and a half with one, and I start thinking to myself, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm doing this. It's an 11-hour total round trip because I'm waiting forever. I end up only have one on me now, which means I'm going to be screwed again tomorrow. Like, what am I doing? And while I'm on the turnpike, I Googled high sobriety Los Angeles, and the phone number popped up. This is like 6 p.m. or 9 p.m. So it's like 6 p.m. there in LA, and the guy answered and he talked to me for an hour and a half. And I finally felt like somebody understood what I was going through.
Hmm.
So he was like, I can have a bed for you by Wednesday. And I said, okay. I said, I'll let you know by Monday what's going on. Because I had to talk to my family. They wanted me to go to rehab a dozen times in my 20s and I'm 31 at that point. And I told my dad, we owned a company together, a plumbing business. And I told my dad, listen, like, I got to go away and I got to go to rehab. He was like, for weed? Because he knew I smoked weed, but he didn't know about all the pills and all the drinking. So he was kind of shocked. My mom was more like, okay, yeah, you're back on pills, go to rehab. Um, so I went to rehab. And while I was there, they had us go to 2 meetings a day. They drove us to the meetings, and it was a nooner and an 8 o'clock every day. And I just loved the fellowshipping. I
Yeah.
fell in love with. I was finally learning who I was as a person. I went across the country because I didn't want to know anybody in rehab. All my friends went to Florida, and I didn't want to go to Florida and fall back in with the same people. I wanted to learn who I was in a new place. And since I was going willingly, it worked. I wanted a difference. I learned the difference between wants and needs, right? We need air to breathe, we need food, we need water, but we don't need recovery. We have to want it. And once you want it for yourself, that's the time it's going to work. If you need it, it's usually for a family so they don't abandon you, or need it for the police so they don't arrest you. And those aren't really sustainable ways to get sober because you're truly not ready. I was truly ready when I made that phone call on that Saturday. I knew that I felt heard. And for the first time, like, we were joking around. I was a comedian at the time. Like, I was doing stand-up comedy and addiction. And I've only done it once in recovery, and I felt kind of weird being on a stage. Even though I spoke in meetings, I was so used to just being honest, and I haven't gotten a chance to be back on a stage because I don't live close to it anymore. I live like in the mountains in PA, and really, like, kind of, we have a college in our town, but besides that, it's kind of a secluded area. But yeah, that's basically like how I got sober and why I got sober. And I've relapsed on alcohol, and it was one of those things like, you're not a true alcoholic, and then I find out quickly that I am. And so I've been sober from alcohol and pills, coming up on 4 years on leap day. So
Right
my
on.
sober date is 2/29. So this will be the first time that we can actually celebrate on our anniversary.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations. However, I do want to say that incarceration does help. There are a lot of addicts that can't stop, even though they want to stop. They don't want to stop. They don't want to destroy their life, but they can't not. And incarceration offers people a respite. I'm a huge supporter of it. I have lots of people in my life, especially now, who cannot stop on their own, and they do not like themselves or their conditions. And unfortunately, laws have changed everywhere, and so people aren't even being separated in that way. And so when a person is kept away from their drug of choice, clarity does happen. Clarity does occur, and I would argue that every prison that I've ever been in, where I'm working with other folks, um, and even when I was a prisoner, people always plan to have a different life, but because they don't practice new behaviors and patterns, they don't access that life. And for folks who started using at really young ages, that's what they know. And most of us don't start out in life saying, "Oh, I think I want to be a drug addict and a criminal." But when we live, it's kind of like riding your bike on a trail, right? On a dirt trail. And then you've ridden it on the same place so many times that you've developed this rut in the trail. And every time, even though you don't want to fall into the rut because it's too deep and you wreck all the time, your tires just naturally gravitate toward that rut, right? And so one of my biggest arguments is always that forced separation can aid an individual to create that new path when things are intentional, when we're practicing these new things. And I believe that when we start to live with integrity, when we learn how to look at ourselves in a different way, and we start to live with integrity, we're a little less willing to give that up sometimes. And so yeah, so that's the majority of everything I do focuses on that. Today, I've been working in a number of different areas. I graduated UW. I did that mainly because I knew that somebody with 17 felony convictions typically isn't taken very seriously. And I had some things that I wanted to be able to change with our systems. And so for the last few years, I have been working with the state of Tennessee's Department of Human Services. We're working on a government initiative. I have a couple of businesses, one of which, and I don't even know if you've seen any of them, but I have a docu-series. And so I'm thinking to myself, I might have to travel over and see you and do an interview with you.
Yeah,
We're on YouTube. I'm about to reach 1,000 subscribers,
I
probably
saw.
by the end of the day.
I saw when I followed it, it was like 988 or 998.
We're 998 today. And so this is the thing too. And so when you post this episode, tag me in it. And I don't really know how it works on YouTube, but I'd love to share your episode and try to help you get some more followers. So give
Oh
me
yeah,
your contact information too. And I would love to. So once you have this edited, just send me some info and I will post your episode on all of my stuff and try to help you
what
there
I
also.
thank you. That's awesome. What I
Yeah.
usually do is because I release weekly episodes, like I said.
Uh-huh.
Um, but once I have the episode on YouTube, I send people the link and I say, listen, this won't be posted for like 2 months. But if you
Yeah.
want to share your story on your own page or
Uh-huh.
with people that you're friends with individually, this is the link to the YouTube because I put it
Yeah,
on
and
list.
if you tag me, if you do an @VJenny Burton on YouTube, I think that'll connect us
It
too.
will.
So
Yeah.
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 So anything I can do to support you. But anyway, so I've been working. So I have a program. In a major state institution here in Washington State. My goal is to expand that, and of course, I'm doing the docu-series, and we're interviewing people all over the nation, from
What's
people
the
in
docu-series
encampments.
called?
It's called Modern America. Yeah.
And what's it about?
It is the real life stories on the other side of these policies that are happening across our nation. So we cover things from all the way from people inside of encampments that are strung out on drugs to parents who have lost their kids to law enforcement and legislators. We've covered a lot of stuff on fentanyl. We've started talking to folks who have been impacted by the school districts, in their towns. But really just anything that is on the other side or involved with the policies that are dictating how lives are lived. And so and a lot of it stems from, I was on the UW campus and I was on there with a bunch of really brilliant young people, and they were all making decisions for what happens in people's lives like ours. And the thing that I learned after being on there for a couple of years was that they're really amazing and they're very intelligent, and they have absolutely no idea what it's like to come from where we come from. But yet they're making the decisions for what our lives should look like. And I knew that that needed to change. And so my whole life has been dedicated to trying to improve the quality of services and stability for people just like myself.
Yeah, and that's completely true. I mean, um, giving back like that, you feel a sense of gratitude more
Oh,
because
absolutely.
you feel you know what you're doing is the right thing. And a lot of lawmakers don't know shit about what we're doing. You know,
That's true.
they have no idea that, and people will tell you that and addicts are some of the smartest people out there. I
Well,
mean,
the interesting thing about lawmakers also is that they're not really interested in talking with folks like us to help influence how they create change. So they tend to go to these nonprofits who are exacerbating the problem
yeah,
and
like you
talk to
saw Jelly
them.
Roll. I'm sure you've seen the viral video of Jelly.
I've seen the video has come up, but I haven't watched it yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and watch that.
Yeah, it's good. It's nice to hear somebody like him where he's like he flat out says, I cannot vote for any of you, so I feel like I'm the best person to give my opinion.
Yeah.
Because his vote, he can't vote because he's a criminal or whatever. He has felonies,
Yeah. Yeah.
so he can't vote. And he's like, that's why you should listen to me because I can tell you what's going on in the streets
Yeah.
and how you can make changes and why you need to make changes. Because, I mean, it went from the Oxycontin to fentanyl really quick. Once they stopped making Oxycontin, people started finding fentanyl, and they would find it in the older community
Well,
by
the cartels have developed the street level fentanyl, and it's in everything. They don't even have heroin and stuff anymore. I mean,
no.
it's almost obsolete.
It's great that people have test kits nowadays, but there's people out there that are looking for fentanyl. They
Hmm.
don't want just heroin. They want fentanyl. Like I grew up 5 minutes from Philly, which means I grew up 15 minutes from Kensington.
Yeah,
And Kensington is one of the biggest open air markets in the country, if not the
right,
biggest.
right.
And it's fentanyl and it's trank, and they're
Hmm.
both running rampant through there. And
Yeah,
that's when and it's a shame too, because people will go there just to take videos and post on their own page and kind of
I know.
glorify what's
It's
going on.
trauma porn.
That's exactly what it is.
Hmm.
And it's all over TikTok, it's all over Instagram, it's all
Yeah.
over Facebook.
But
Whether it's a
showcasing that
TikTok or a
stuff
reel.
is like, yeah, it's just people are making revenue off of exposing degradation. And I, it is what it is, I suppose. I'm going to not put a value judgment on it, but I will say this. That's why with my show, I'm showing the real life stories from the addict in the streets all the way to those who do get clean and how they change their lives and how the system can work better. And then the opinions and voices of those within the system, prosecuting attorneys, police officers, legislators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I'm trying to show a full scope because I think there are a lot of social narratives that are pushed out that, the average American person who says, I don't know what to do. This is too much. It's tragic. I can't watch this. I'm going to let that person deal with it because it doesn't actually affect me. And the thing is it does. It even affects the people who are not addicts or who don't have addicts in their family because they're paying for it. Their taxes are paying for people to live in squalor and degradation and to feel unsafe. We have a growing public safety problem across the nation, even in some of our Midwest states that freeze in the winter, like Montana. You'd be surprised. But it's a
I've had
growing
somebody
problem.
on from Denver that was homeless in Denver.
Yeah, Denver has a homeless problem. I mean, it's all throughout the Midwest. It's all on the East Coast, as you know, and it's on the West Coast. And it's even in some of the red states who, you know, don't really tolerate certain things. And so, what we're doing is we're denying people the opportunity. When we don't hold people accountable and pull them out of, it's kind of like, and I use this illustration a lot. If there was a guy sitting in front of a store and you walked out and he was stabbing himself repeatedly with a knife, would you call 911? You know, but why are we allowing people to commit open suicide and then we support it through a nonprofit structure, a social service structure? That's what we do. We're keeping people in their destructive paths, and we're keeping them high on drugs like methadone and Suboxone that
Yeah.
enable them to continue on their addiction, Subutex. And so, we have
Vivitrol
zero.
to me was the saver.
What's that?
Vivitrol, advocate for Vivitrol to anybody that's trying to quit,
Yep.
because Vivitrol, not only will you, if you stop it, you won't get withdrawals like Suboxone or methadone. You don't need to wean yourself off of Vivitrol, and it also helps with your mind. I had a guy on here that I grew up with, and he went through 13 rehabs in 4 years,
Mhm.
and all for the same thing, and it was heroin and pills and whatever he can get his hands on. And then he started getting a Vivitrol shot after like his 14th rehab stay.
Yeah.
And he remembered going to his old place where he used to get high, and that person getting high in front of him. He's like, I got to get out of here. And he went and got in his car and left and never thought about using drugs again, because
Mm.
it finally gave him that mindset of like, what is actually going on around me, and kind of gave him that clarity that he needed to walk out of there and go find a room somewhere, go find a church basement and fellowship. And he's been sober 6 years now.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
I think it's a
Is
huge
he still
testament.
on the Vivitrol?
No, he stopped after 18 months.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he kept with
That's a
it.
good, I'm going to look more into Vivitrol.
It's
I'm
a
not a supporter of the narcotic solution. I
no.
don't I
Either.
don't support those. They
I
keep people
understand why
high.
you're doing it. I understand why you're doing it, but at the same time, when I went to rehab, I refused Suboxone, and they were like, "Why are you? It's going to hurt really bad." And I said, "It should hurt really bad. I don't want to come back here again."
If you don't feel the consequences of your choices, you're destined to repeat it.
Yep.
And I agree. And this is the thing, and that I'm not going to pretend that I've never used Suboxone. I've never been prescribed Suboxone, but I've used it to
Use
kick.
same. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but you can effectively kick even on a high dose addiction, right? You can be kicked from it within a month without having all of the awful side effects if you do it appropriately. And you don't need a doctor to do that. But the doctors, okay, the doctors are paid per dose for these things. And that's my problem. And and I get it. I get it, right? As a society, people want to just see certain things stop. But the bottom line is that that's not what's happening. We're
No, people
spending
are getting
billions, if not
prescribed eight
trillions of
milligrams a
dollars.
day. People are getting 8 milligrams a day, like full strips.
Yeah,
And
no, they're loaded. They're
yeah,
loaded.
and that's a ridiculous amount. When I
It
used
is.
subs, it was only because I was trying to stay well enough to go buy pills again.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I always had Suboxone like in my dresser drawer, and that
Yeah.
was in case of
Right,
emergency.
because you buy it, right? That's
Yeah,
what I did. I used to buy it off the
ten
street.
bucks.
Well, this is a thing too. I started doing some research and I have a bunch of websites. I'm going to continue to follow the money on it. But, even the drug manufacturers claim in their side effects that even 2 milligrams of Suboxone eliminates 80% of your ability to access your emotions. If you cannot access your emotions, you cannot recover. And that's why the withdrawal, because you're still loaded. And that's not to say that I don't know people who haven't benefited, but I'm going to tell you the way that it's used overall is it's just changing the dope man from the guy on the street to our medical system. And for me, I believe that people want to live a quality life and live in integrity more often than not. We get into these places and we don't know how to navigate our emotions. We don't know how to navigate certain things. And I know for a fact, you can probably attest to this. When you use drugs for a long enough period of time, you forget some of those fundamental things, right? But when we clear away the fog and the haze from our mind, we can fall back onto the foundations that were beneficial, or it gives us the platform to be able to learn a new foundation so that we can actually appreciate and respect the person that's looking back at us in the mirror.
Yep.
Everything I do is for that.
Yeah, and that's amazing because finding your passion like you clearly have, because it sounds like obviously you've been in this long enough on the addict end, then I can appreciate your passion and what you do. It's almost like I had somebody reach out to me who wanted to be on my show, but all he's ever did was write a book about recovery and addiction, but him himself has never been in addiction.
Right.
And I understand, I appreciate you writing something that's, for addicts, but I need to read the story by the addict.
There you go.
I need to hear that
Lived
testimony,
experience. Right. If you
if
have it, because this is the thing. So I'm a mountain climber, right? So I switched addictions. I now climb mountains. I would rather go up with the guy who can't read, that's been up the mountain 50 times, than the guy that's read the book 50 times and took the class.
yeah, because the
You know what
experience
I mean?
when I was in rehab, I had three therapists. One because one they changed over to one halfway through because the one was pregnant and was going out of work. And so I had two there, but then there was a third therapist that worked there that I talked to over a cigarette like every day. And I talked to him because like he was my therapist because he was an addict that got his shit together and was now a therapist. So
Yeah.
not only was he somebody trained by the book, but he was somebody who lived it on the streets before he learned it in a book.
Yeah.
And I appreciated his point of view because I appreciate the point of view from the book. I appreciate you talking to me, let me vent, and giving me some direction on how I process grief and loss. But when I talk about, the things I did in addiction, I want to talk to somebody who has also lived that kind of life where you had to commit crimes. I was a white collared addict. I held a job the entire time. I snorted and I never shot. You know, I went to a rehab and it worked the first time. My parents are still, well, my dad just passed away in June, but my
Sorry,
parents were together for, thank you. My parents were together for 35 years, 38
yeah,
years. So, you know, I've seen everything from like the white collar side of it and being like, oh, pick a fence and a brother and a sister and all that kind of thing. But until I went to rehab, I didn't know who I was at 32 years old. I had to
yeah,
learn how to be a human being again. That's why they have you do your own laundry, fold, do your bed every day, you know, eat 3 meals a day, eat three
yeah,
meals a day. Because I was big in addiction, like I was really heavy in addiction. And I was one of those addicts that people were like, how are you a drug addict if you're fat? And I'm like, easy. Like I have the worst eating, like, you know, because I'm trying to stay high. I'm afraid eating will kill my high. And I'm sure, like Chris Farley was always at his biggest when he was heavier into drugs.
mm,
And I relate to that as opposed to your before. You have one of the best glow ups that I've ever seen.
thank
Um,
you.
so I want to thank you for taking the time to sit down
Yeah,
and talk to me and give me some of your backstory. Because, like I said, I've seen your story, not your story, but like your picture all over the place.
yeah,
So I can really appreciate what you've been through to what you
thanks,
do
JD.
today and how much you dedicate your life to helping people also not have to live that life anymore and find some light in the tunnel, see the forest through the trees, all
Yeah,
those things that
all
you
those cliches that are
all,
so relevant.
and they are, you know, it's called a cliche for a reason. You know, it is relevant to me. So thank you again for sitting down. Like I love what you're doing for your work, and I can't wait to
Thank you.
check out your show. Check out
Yeah,
our show. It'll,
yep.
I don't know,
Modern America on YouTube.
what is it again?
Modern America on YouTube. You
Modern
can
America.
find it under V Ginny Burton, VGINNY BURTON. That's my social media handle on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on Instagram as well.
And I'm gonna have the link to your modern, my God,
Modern America. You're
modern
good.
America.
I
It's
got
been,
your back.
I'll have the link in the bio. So if you're
Perfect.
looking to, whether you're listening to this or watching this and you want to check out her show, go to the link in the description. It'll take you right to her show.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much,
It was
JD.
great
Thanks for your
chatting
time
with
today.
you. All right. Have a good day.